So without further ado, Dan is going to come on stage and tell you, I think he's going to give you a few examples, and I don't know that he has a plan. He's going to improvise because that's what he does really well. Let's invite and welcome Dan Phelps to Full Sail Treehouse.
I don't have a plan, so. Are there any questions?
Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm not sure what that was. It's a journey, yeah. I'm improvising, using all kinds of normal things that you use in a guitar rig, and then also this whole sort of science project gone wrong laptop thing that I have going on as well. And even just figuring out how to talk about everything that's going on is kind of an exploration for me. So maybe I'll start with just kind of a quick run through of what my signal chain is and kind of how I'm set up, and then if there's any questions or I can improvise more, dive into some other weird techniques and sounds that I've figured out, and we can kind of go from there. I have a guitar. This is a little bit of an odd one, built by a company in Northern California called Ronin. They build instruments out of this ancient reclaimed redwood, which is pretty amazing. I think the youngest piece of wood that they use is 800 years old, and some are much older. So it's, I'm not a botanist, but I think it's pretty different on a molecular level than a lot of wood that's maybe 50 years old. They design their own pickups, and this one has kind of a little suite of different electronics in it. This is a microphone. It's like a hacked down harmonica microphone that I can activate with this for really antisocial sounds. Things like that. This is a 60 cycle hum switch, which is, super useful. And this is I call this if I want to get fired from my folk gig. This is what I start going to. And then this is just a kill switch. Other unique things going on with this. They call this the magic button, and it's actually the pickup, like a contact pickup that you would use on a harp, hidden somewhere in the guitar body. So you start picking up all of this crazy resonance, and it's combined with the magnetic pickup, so you sort of get this kind of like a space dobro sort of thing going on. So there's kind of a crazy amount of options just right there from the source of what I'm playing and using my hands. From there, I have a bunch of pedals, kind of nothing outlandish, fuzz pedals, whammy pedal, filters, and delays, and all the kind of normal stuff that guitar players like to explore. And then from there, where it starts getting strange is I go to the amp, and then I'm using this box made by Fryette, which is called a power station, which kind of gives me the ability to run the amp in whatever settings I want and then control the volume separately. And I also get a line out from here into the laptop rig. which is its own crazy journey. You kind of see it up here. I'm running Ableton Live, which I'm not using most of the normal functionality of Ableton. I'm just using it as a host for plugins and also using their looper. So, and this kind of gets into what you think of as looping or loops. You know, when you say loop, you usually think of a 1-bar, 4-bar phrase or something that's repeating that you're using in a track or playing along to. I'm mostly looping arrhythmically or creating a bunch of stuff that then has its own sort of irrational rhythm to it, but I'm not so much focused on like playing a groove and then playing something over that. So I'm not super concerned with rhythm in this setup. I have the guitar coming in on a channel, and I can send it to 4 different effects chains. So this kind of goes into what inspired me about this setup is that I wanted to take things that I would do at the mix stage of a project where you have kind of your last opportunity to completely transform something with effects and textures and make something new out of it. I want to sort of bring that into the performance stage of what I'm doing. So this is kind of set up sort of like just a mix desk to a certain degree because I have the guitar coming in. You're not hearing any of the dry signal of the guitar through the laptop. I just have pre-fader sends going out to a bunch of different places. So I have a really beautiful sort of Brian Eno-esque celestial pitch reverb kind of thing. Which is made by Valhalla DSP and looks like this. On another channel, I have this digital recreation of the Lexicon Pcm 42, which is a pretty classic piece of studio gear. And the thing I use this for is it has what's called square wave modulation, where instead of modulating the delays using a sine wave, it uses a square wave, which causes the pitch to jump up and down, sometimes at random seeming intervals, but I'll play into it a little bit, and it'll take a second probably for it to start. You combine that with the dry sound. I can also lock a little bit of sound in there and actually use this as another looping device. It'll just keep doing this ad infinitum. Part of improvising by myself is finding out ways to be surprised when you play with other people. You get a lot of feedback and a lot of new ideas coming at you, and so what I do with the laptop is sort of generate random events to surprise me and push me in different directions, because I don't necessarily always get that from right here. So that channel is kind of like the problem guy in your band that's only half paying attention, and it's like, you know, playing to his own drummer. I have another channel that just has a delay on it, and I'm using the Sound Toys Echo Boy, which I love all of the Sound Toys plugins. And I will, this is just kind of normal delay channel, though I will sometimes change the style of this plugin because I like how it interacts with other things that I have going on. Like if I use this transmitter setting, with the dry signal, it kind of creates this neat bandpass delay. Other higher texture. And my last effects channel, my last send, goes to kind of the wildcard channel, which usually has some form of distortion going on it, and pitch shifting sometimes, filtering. So I have a lot of stuff loaded on this. This Devil Lock, which is a recreation of the Shure Level Lock compressor, is on here all the time. There's some delay, and usually has, it's just the wet signal. It's a bit wily. You have to watch the level of this one. So I've got some phasing going on. I have some distortion and compression. Some delay. I will sometimes use some pitch shifting. There we go. So on and so forth. Those are my 4 effects chains that I have set up. And I also use the Ableton Live Looper plugin and feed the same 4. So I can kind of continuously vary how much of my dry guitar, how much of the looping is being sent there. Kind of gives me this really rich palette and ability to transform even the pre-recorded or the stuff that's already stored in the looper that's just playing. I can sort of transform what it's doing for me live to sort of follow my whimsy. I have a MIDI controller on the floor that I have some of the looping stuff mapped to. But just as an example, I can say play a few notes into this. So I have a loop going. We can hear the dry version of it. Looks like it's going backwards right now. So that's what the dry loop sounds like. I can send it to all these different places though. I can kind of do these sleight of hand things where I have a loop going and kind of bring big changes about in the arrangement that I'm improvising just by shifting where it's going effects-wise. It sort of gives me a lot of mileage from like one little bit of audio, kind of like the dub approach to live mixing a track or something. So that in combination with being able to bring up the dry signal, which I have on a pedal down here, gives me a lot of opportunity to create new things and kind of just improvise my way in and out of problems. So there's also just a 3-band EQ happening right after the looper. So I can darken things way up, make it a lot brighter, which is helpful feeding the effects. You can create a whole bunch of different textures. So it gives me a lot to work with. It's complex, but it's also, there's that guy doing his own thing. It gives me the ability to improvise, and it's complex enough to do really complicated sounding things, but simple enough that I can internalize it and not have to think too hard about what's going on while I'm improvising. I can just sort of create, reach over here, grab some knobs, and start creating new stuff. Are there any questions about that? Signal chain, effects.
So I've got a mic here, and just raise your hand and I'll bring it to you.
Awesome. I had a question about what in the future you think you might do to expand on your setup. Like, what are some of your, like a wish list, if you will, of ways that you could do more of what you want to do with this sound and your template?
That's a really good question. The computer is, just bringing the computer into a setup, it's so limitless of what you can do, how you want to route things. I mean, I'm using Live as a template, but if you get into Max MSP or anything, Reactor, where you're building your own effects chains and programs and all that kind of stuff, it can get, I would drown in that. It's so deep. Bringing more rhythmic looping stuff into it, there's a little bit of a latency issue there that I have to deal with as much processing as I'm doing right now. It actually is hard to do loop stuff. The first loop that I lay down works just fine, but starting to play to that, the latency really throws off, stuff that I'm playing is actually coming back however many milliseconds later. Other things that I would like to expand is a good question. I take little bites of stuff, it's sort of like, I used to have the volume control for the looper track, just the dry track on one of these knobs, and it was like, well, can I put it on a pedal, so that I can sort of change what's happening effects-wise while also fading in and out, and it sort of takes me a couple of rounds of playing or doing a couple of gigs for that stuff to get internalized where it's not a new thing. It'd be amazing to find some way to, I'd really love to build a custom controller, because when you're just buying things off the shelf, you're buying something that somebody has sort of pre-decided what it's for, what you're using it for. I don't get very much feedback from this thing. Like, I can't look down and tell if this effect is on or off or that kind of stuff. So someday a custom controller that looks like an old like Universal Audio console would be awesome, but it actually gave me feedback and I could sort of see what was happening. Those are some of the things that I would expand on.
Here, let me come up before you ask your question, because no one will hear you in back.
It's possible to have like a little bit of house lights or something so I can see you guys.
What is that, like paper, stapler, that little stapler?
Oh, this
looking
thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an EBO. It does looks like an old swing line stapler or something, because I like to get my taxes done while I'm looping. This has been around since the 80s, I think, and it creates a magnetic field with the string that lets you have infinite sustain, which And it's got a setting that I think that one kind of brings in a higher harmonic. It has another setting with more fundamental. No, there's the higher harmonic. So, and that's sort of the normal thing that you see a lot of people do with this, is the one string kind of stuff. I like to use it for creating pads and sort of just big textures, and sort of, I'll use this for instance. If I'm going to do a loop here, kind of pre-send the loop channel to some effects. So this kind of layer one of a loop, and I can kind of use this to replicate sort of the more ambient sounds of an orchestra or something. That's how my brain processes it. Kind of each time the loop goes around the cycle, I'll fade in some different notes. And then a feature of this looper is that you can double or halve the length of the loop. So I can make that, this is 4 times as long as it was, which means I can now build some longer themes over top of that. I will also use some pitch shifting to sort of move the guitar out of its normal range. So some lower notes, I'll shift the guitar 2 octaves up to create that really sort of whispery harmonic sound that you get in violins. That's what I do with that a lot. I do a lot of things that are sort of focused on extending the range of the instrument. Can I put some lower notes in? Can I put some really high notes in? And can I, this, sort of removes this in the volume pedal, remove the guitar from, being an instrument that always has a transient attack, get envious of horn players or string players who can decide how long their note takes to get to you, rather than just that. So, yeah.
So I've been getting like Pink Floyd intro vibes. Who would you say was your influence?
For the looping stuff, Robert Fripp is, a huge guitar player, founder of King Crimson, is sort of a huge influence. Brian Eno pioneered a lot of things, especially with tape loops and using different length loops to sort of move in time differently over each other, which I sort of use some of those concepts. He calls it, I think, self-generative music, where you have a loop that's 30 seconds and a loop that's 40 seconds and a loop that's a minute long and one that's another length that can sort of play infinitely. And because they're never going to be in sync, they will generate their own unique events. So Brian Eno is a big influence. Probably the biggest influence is there's a guitar player named David Torn who started originating a lot of these techniques in the late 70s, I think. He's kind of like a magic wizard of a musician with this white hair that comes out to here. He's total amazing, badass guitar player, total master of all of his technology stuff, and he originated a lot of the textures that are really normal. You've heard him, he does a lot of film soundtracks, a lot of like beautiful ambient stuff, like on the Traffic soundtrack and stuff like that. He gets hired by composers a lot to come in and sort of provide the umami thing that you don't know what it is in the arrangement, but it's there. And then there are other, no, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Bill Frisell, or there are people who do sort of different versions of looping. Maybe they're not quite as deranged as this, but they incorporate into their playing in some beautiful way. So, even with just like a looping pedal that somebody's using, or delay, or any of that kind of stuff, can also function as a looper. And then musically, I never know what I'm gonna start creating when I start playing. I have sort of, you could think of them as like ideas or modules that I'm working on over time. Like in the middle of an hour-long performance, I might sort of come back to a sound or a thing that I've been messing with and revisit it. So that's not really pure improvisation. But a lot of the, sorry, I went on a little tangent there. A lot of the textures that I want to sort of create are things you hear in modern classical. Like there's a composer named John Luther Adams, for instance, who did this gorgeous piece of music for string quartet, where the musicians never ever press the string down against the fingerboard. So it's all open notes and harmonics. And it's just the most beautiful, floating, ethereal, like hard to identify, but emotionally like enrapturing piece of music. So stuff like that, I've wanted to, I love guitar playing as well, but wanting to move it beyond, hot licks and things like that. So that's a few of the people. Whenever someone asks me that question, I usually forget, and then in a few hours I'll be, why didn't I think of that guy, There are kind of a number of, I don't know if you would call them tricks, but ways that I use this looping plugin in Ableton to generate weird sounds that a lot of looping devices do them. This one has a pretty comprehensive set of features beyond just I can capture a piece of audio and then loop it and then play on top of it, which that's sort of like the ground floor functionality for a looping device. With this, like I showed you, I can make a loop twice as long and then double that and then double that. I can make it half as long, shrink it down. It'll play stuff backwards that I record. I can continually mess with that. I can change the pitch of whatever I've recorded in octaves, and it plays the loop twice as fast, literally like if you were speeding up a tape machine. Everything is twice as high in pitch and twice as fast, and I can move it up and down 3 octaves. So I kind of use all of that stuff intermittently to create weird things. So say I'm going to lay down just like a bed of a texture or something. So I've got this thing now. So this is a little window into how my brain works, but I started the loop after I had already played the note. So now it actually has a little bit of a glitch at the beginning and end, like the loop point of the loop. But it's going through a delay, and now it's got a rhythm that I'm hearing. So that was an unintentional consequence of how I did that, which is kind of cool. If I were improvising, I'd be launching off of that right now. But I can move that up and down in pitch. Here's twice as fast. So on and so forth. And then down as well. One of the cool things that I like about this is that if I change the pitch on the looper while I'm playing, it will, when it plays back what I just recorded, it'll be jumping around all over the place because it'll be changing it based on where it was at, like if you were changing the speed on a tape machine. So I'll play a little something and move it around. Which the dry version of that sounds like this. And kind of tied to the improvisation thing and trying to have a setup that causes unexpected musical events, this is another version of that. Like, I didn't plan that rhythm, but it's there now. And it's kind of, the cool thing about looping is you can have what I call an irrational rhythm, where it's not actually in time, but because you hear it over and over again, your brain starts to process it as being an actual rhythm or a beat. So I've created a situation for myself there where I've got this rhythm and didn't expect it. Oftentimes I'll just start putting more stuff into the loop in order to create more problems for myself that I have to then solve and figure out how to escape from. That's backwards. And then kind of another feature of this looper, once I sort of get tired of hanging out with this loop, or I feel like I've sort of done as much as I can with it, I can turn down the feedback of it, which basically turns it into a digital delay, where every time it loops around, it's going to slowly let go of the loop a little bit. It's going to fade in volume, which that allows me to then go back into record on the looper and start layering something else that's going to overtake that eventually. is a simple way of sort of shifting out of a rhythm or a particular texture or just a piece of like section of improvisation. Also a way to change key, because when you're working with loops, you're sort of stuck working with that in that like tonal center that the loop is in. If I sort of stumble on the next thing that I like, I can lock that in, and that's now my loop material. And then with being able to shift where it's going, how much of the dry signal you're hearing, how much of the effect, I can do this sleight of hand stuff where I'm transforming it. So I'm going to really lean on this big ambient reverb thing, for instance, and slowly fade out all the dry signal. And the delay, so we're just left with this big amorphous thing. And then once I'm here, I can actually change the pitch of it without you really hearing it as a jump. It just sort of blossoms into another thing, which is that's the sort of sleight of hand, like I can control how it's transformed, and it's like an economy of using what you have too, because I'm just taking a simple piece of audio and transforming it into a bunch of different things. So, any other questions about any of that?
How do you go from like doing the ambient music to composing an actual song? Like, do you ever hear something and you're like, oh, I need to record that, and then you do that?
Yeah. Well, sometimes doing the ambient thing, doing the looping thing is a good jumping off point, because I'll create a texture or some sort of shifting soundscape that makes me then play something that I didn't expect. And then I can sort of say, oh, well, there's a composition in that, you know, rather than, it's nice to just sit down with a guitar plugged into an amp or an acoustic guitar and mess around and find something, but it's sort of another version of that. What I do on a lot of my records, because I'm just, if I step back a few steps, every part of my process is based on improvisation. So even if I'm sitting down to write a piece of music, or I'm in a recording session and someone is saying, here's my song, you know, what, like, you need to create a part for this, I'm improvising until I find the thing that I want to refine, you know. So there's sort of like this beginner's mind, like child brain that I go into, where I'm just messing around until something catches my fancy, or if someone else who's in charge says, that's cool, like let's pursue that. When I do my own records, they're often based on improvising with other people. So I'll say, like, who do I want to play with, and just like see what they come up with out of thin air. And then I'll take that recording and kind of go back in maybe a 20-minute improvisation. There's a 5-minute section where everything just clicked, and I say, oh, well, that's like, that sounds like music. It's like nobody planned that, but it sounds like this beautiful group occurrence. And then I'll go back and start overdubbing things and maybe editing little bits out that where it died for a minute and then it came back, and kind of like start chiseling away at it and finding the sculpture underneath, like the hidden intention of what we were all intending to do while we were improvising, and layering things on top of that. And then you don't know that it was improvised. It sounds like a through composed kind of thing. I think what's amazing about delving into these kind of this kind of approach to textures and creation, even a little bit, is that when you play an instrument for a long time, it's really hard not to get trapped in shapes or patterns or sounds that you like, you know, just muscle memory where you go to when you're playing. But being able to generate some of these textures just really takes my brain out of the normal places. Even with a song arrangement, someone brings in something that, you know, is pedestrian changes and, you know, just like sort of really normal harmony, all of a sudden creating a different texture will make that sound fresh or help you hear a new direction that it can go in. So for me, that's sort of what this stuff gives me access to. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
You talk a lot about looping when it's like 30, 40 or minute long clips. Do you ever think it would be possible for someone to release a quote unquote record where it's just loops, but no matter how long you play it, it's going to be a different song? Or will that not ever reach market?
Well, like for instance, Brian Eno has done a version of that. I think his new record that he maybe released 4 or 5 months ago, something like that, is an app that has loops in it. And so every time you fire it up on your phone, it's self-generating new music. He created all the source material for it, but it's sort of self-generating.
Yeah, 77 million paintings.
Yeah, he did the same thing with
on
visual
that,
art. Yeah.
and it's software. And then I think Todd Rundgren did something like that in the 90s. Of course,
Yeah.
it wasn't ambient, but it was the similar idea. Did you have a question? Okay.
It's a cool idea, though. I mean, for like art gallery installations, or I mean, I'm interested also in the concept of doing music for specific spaces. You know, like what would you, if someone hired you to compose generative music for, you know, a hotel lobby or something? I mean, that would just be an interesting challenge. And then, you know, being able to go there for 1,000 years and never hear the same combination of things would be intriguing. Yeah.
You talked about how sometimes the loops will generate like a polyrhythm or an irrational rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been like in an improv session with like you and a drummer and like a bassist or something like that, and it creates one of those rhythms and they either have trouble following along or it creates something interesting like that?
It depends. Thankfully, I've been in scenarios with really great musicians where they lock onto it and start playing the irrational rhythm. You know, there's a whole style of playing inspired, like playing acoustic drums inspired by hip hop production, and you hear it a lot in like the gospel scene with drummers who play broken beats, essentially, where they've figured out how to, you know, play the hi-hat part, you know, like from a different drum beat over something else, and they play that consistently. Questlove is sort of the like originator, or at least the most, I don't know if he's originator, he's the most recognizable person doing a lot of that stuff. So I've been in cool situations where I've generated something totally not intending for it to be played to, and someone's locked onto it, which that's kind of superhuman, I think. But what I'm doing also varies with if I'm playing a solo performance, then I don't have to think about how anyone else is being, other than the audience, is being affected by what I'm doing. If I'm playing with other people, you know, there's a concept in improv comedy where your response to anything that, you know, someone else on stage presents to you is yes and. You never ask a question. You never, if someone comes up and says, "This is a gun," you never say, "No, it's not," you know, because that breaks the flow and it just brings dead space. So I think in music improvisation, it's wise to start from the same place. Someone's presenting you something, you say, "Yes, and." I hear that. However, you also, in music, it's a bit more acceptable to hear somebody doing something and just provide the most inappropriate response possible to it as a way to drive it in another direction. That is also a creative decision. But when I'm improvising with other people, I'm probably not generating as much rhythmic stuff, unless I'm like really comfortable with the drummer and I know that they're just gonna go there.
How much does it make a difference in the formal of like when you get on stage and you kind of have, do you have any plan? Like if you know it's going to be a 10-minute compared to a 50-minute, I mean, how does that work? Or do you even think about form and just let it happen? I mean, by form, by different sounds and different tempos and different keys and different sounds. And
I mean, if I'm honest, I usually start from a similar place with just some of the more ambient sounds and less focused on playing, which is partly anxiety management, where I'm getting on stage and just sort of praying that all the stuff works and the computer doesn't die and all that. So it's like I'll usually start from it's like self-relaxation, try to find something and get me going from there. There's a natural arc that always kind of feels good and is hard to escape from, starting somewhere and then getting bigger and bigger and bigger and some sort of climactic thing, and then you taper off and you leave everybody with this sort of extended sort of thing. It's hard to escape from that because it feels good. It's like why there's a story arc that works in writing. However, you can mess with that if you want to leave everybody deafened and cut off the sound like at the last thing. That's a creative choice too. But when I'm improvising for, say, more than 30 minutes, so a long form thing, I'm usually just following the thread. What was the last thing that I did? What's going to be complementary in the transition, but different enough to be worth going to? And then sometimes I'll just be lost in the middle of it, and I'll decide to try something. Like I have tricks like, for instance, this is a capo, so I can capo the guitar up high, which is, for those not familiar, is sort of like taking the nut and moving it to a different place. So now I'm not playing the guitar anymore. I'm playing like a electric mandolin, essentially. So I can do things like that, sort of just take me into a new direction. And then there are further, let's see if I have it in here. Like I have alligator clips. Sometimes I'll take pieces of guitar string, which I'm surprised that I don't have in here, like a length of the guitar string, and kind of thread it through the strings close to the bridge. Kind of anything that's gonna just make a different instrument out of this for me. So
sort of like prepared guitar.
Exactly, yeah. There's a number of guitar players who have gone really far in this direction. So that's not necessarily musical on a so I've just created, this kind of goes back to like creating problems for myself that I then have to go into a creative place to solve, Also, once you start doing something, it doesn't really sound good to just stop. It's like, whoops. So something like this, I might, let's see, did I lose my, this also happens occasionally where my gear stops talking to each other and I have to really stealthily unplug things and plug them back in. There we go. So I might take something like this. And so I only have 3 of these alligator clips, and I put them on 3 strings. And so now I've kind of decided that my guitar, which used to be the nut used to be here, but now it's here, and is 6 strings, but I only have 3 alligator clips, so I'm going to just sort of pretend like I have a 3-stringed, weird, junkyard instrument. So something like this, I might start working with like a delay rhythm if I'm improvising. So I don't know, that sounds like African music. It sounds like Balinese gamelan a little bit, and so I might use a technique or something like that to sort of take me in a different direction, and I might loop it or I might not. I might use that. Sometimes it's nice to stop looping and just play for a little bit with the textures that are available here, and then create another loop out of that. So those are sort of like different ways that I'll find my thread when I'm improvising, depending on the audience. If I'm playing at like a house show with a bunch of people that I know are not into really out there music, I'll kind of keep a certain ceiling of how intense what I'm doing is. If I'm playing at like an experimental music thing at a coffee shop somewhere, and I know that the 10 people there all love freaky stuff, then I'll do all kinds of stuff, things that are just pure noise, and volume dynamics are emotional, really quiet things that There's a guitar player named Mark Ribot who plays with Tom Waits and a bunch of other people I love, and when he's improvising by himself, he'll turn the volume all the way down on the guitar and just play, which is a an emotional choice, because people have to either shut up or they won't hear you. And then you can do the same thing with deafening volume. So kind of depending on the audience and depending on the length of time that I have, I do 4-hour shows where it's 4 hours of continuous sound, and you're working on a whole different arc. You're not even thinking of, after about 3 minutes of this, people are going to get bored. It's like you've got 40 minutes, to build something and take it in another direction, and that's really, doing stuff like that is really illuminating. It takes you out of, like, I don't know, I've been on the verse, and now I've got to go to the chorus, and then I've got to go back to the verse, and then it helps me make music that is outside of forms that way.
Great. Okay, coming your way.
What is like your musical training, like your background, your history of like before you picked up the guitar and was like, okay, I'm gonna add all these effects, and like you decided the wah pedal wasn't enough, like,
right?
So like, what was your background when you started? How long did you play? Was it classical? Like, what were you playing? And to now you're on this avant-garde abstract style.
It's funny because I started playing guitar because of U2, so it's like it's far away from this. But like even from the first moment I picked up the guitar, like I probably had a guitar for 2 years before I even learned how to play a chord. Where I would like look at it and think it was really cool, or I'd plug it into my amp and just just even the fact that you could do that and it's a noise, I probably did for a few years, before I decided I wanted to learn how to play it. And so my mind, my brain has always been drawn towards sound kind of as the first thing. I spent a lot I kind of started from there and got into playing the guitar well later. But I played in rock bands, you know, I did all of that kind of stuff. And is Hunter Menning still here? Yeah, I was in a band with Hunter when I was like 14 maybe, where we made stuff up, and that was like one of my introductions to the fact that you could just make things up. So thank you, Hunter, for that. Yeah, and so then from there, you know, the first guitar pedal I ever bought was a delay pedal. It's a Boss pedal that actually still works like 20 years later, which feels like a miracle. And you know, the first thing I did was just like, well, what does it sound like if you turn all the knobs this way? What do you sound like do the opposite, you know? And started experimenting with that. And I spent a lot of time in the following years like messing around with weird guitar tones, you know. Always like, how could I take this away from sounding like a guitar? Because there are times when I would want to create a musical effect or a musical event, but you know, it's just like not the thing, you know. Like if you come to the second verse of a song and you want to have a little something that was not in the first verse of the arrangement, but you don't necessarily want a guitar part, like what do, you know? So I would figure out I can just, you know, use things like long reverbs, long delays to create a texture, you know, or even better, you know, something like. So, you know, rather than just doing the guitar thing and going, you know, that's, first of all, that eats up a ton of frequency content in a mix and doesn't necessarily even sound really good, and you don't need everybody in the arrangement just going dun, 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 dun the entire time. You know, I figured out that I could do things like psyched because it's like there's a church organ or something that just showed up out of nowhere, and you create these different textures. So that was sort of the next phase. How do I use all of this sound for musical purposes? And then I always messed around with the laptop stuff a little bit and bringing like this. Sometimes I feel like I'm a dumb guitar player, you know, like I understand knobs, I understand these separate little discrete devices and a guitar amp, and you know, you play it harder, it gets louder and more distorted and all that sort of stuff. Like that makes sense to me. So bringing the laptop into it was just like it's like a whole world I was afraid of. And but I always messed around with it, and maybe 10 years ago actually started using it in recording to do loops. I did this album called Modular that Keith referenced, where the drummer had his laptop running with Ableton and I had mine running with Ableton, and we had them synced. So we were generating textures and things that we would then play off of, and he was doing live processing of the drums with effects. And so, which again, if you're going to get together with somebody and improvise for a long time, like you're going to do a couple of days, it's really great to have something that's not you to inspire you and bounce off of, you know. What is, all of a sudden I'm hearing this effect on my drums or my guitar, and that sort of sparks all of these different ideas, different rhythms, different textures, all that kind of stuff. Fast forward to maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I started doing some shows with a piano player where we were improvising for a really long time. And I started using this. I had used it on this similar rig on a few records with the idea of bringing mix stage stuff forward into the tracking, you know, like what if I could create that sort of mix effect live, and then everyone who's playing to it gets to hear it too and be inspired by it, hopefully. So once I started doing that successfully, it was like, oh, I think I could do this live and improvise with it. And then I had a standing monthly gig, this 4-hour thing that I was talking about, where I would just create this sonic wallpaper for 4 hours in this big sort of cavernous warehouse space that also had a coffee shop in it. And so I wasn't on stage, you know. I was like, if you looked around behind like the roaster or something, you know, and behind some boxes, I was over there. And I just had these long stretches of time to mess around too, you know, because you're not in a hurry. So a year and a half or so of actually working with that. And then the person I was doing that show with went on tour. And so I just said, well, I guess I'm going to do it on my own and see if I can. And so it's become this thing, which is amazing for me because I'm not the kind of guitar player that's going to stand up here and just like blow you away with my amazing technique and all that kind of stuff. And I've always been envious of singer-songwriters who could just take their acoustic guitar and jump in the car and go play a string of shows. And for me, that's just never existed. I've always kind of been locked into playing with people. But this has given me an avenue where I can sort of do what I'm going to do after this show tonight. I'm going to hop in the car and go play a bunch of shows in the Southeast with this setup. And it's different. It's just a different thing to present. So that's sort of how I arrived at this, and I've been doing it enough now where it's become an instrument unto itself. It's like I'm not interested in things that are just effects. Like I turned that on and now it's on, and then I turned it off and it's off. I'm interested in things that generate music and become instruments in and of themselves. So,
Very cool.
thank you. Thanks.
Let's thank Dan Phelps for this great workshop. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much.